Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're zeroing in on a text that has absolutely sent shockwaves through the literary world and our broader culture. We're talking about Rachel Goldberg-Polin's memoir, When We See You Again. This is a book that chronicles an unimaginably devastating personal loss, but it also became this massive publishing phenomenon. And because of that, it sparked a really complex conversation about how the media and publishing industries actually frame tragedy. My goal today is to break down the core elements of the source material for you clearly and directly. So let's just dive right in. Right off the bat, Rachel establishes the core emotional thesis of her book. In the author's note, she writes, "Since this collision, I have discovered suffering is all the same, so your suffering is like mine." Before she even gets into the harrowing details of her own specific nightmare, she reaches out for universal empathy. It's like she's grabbing you by the hand and saying, "Hey, we all understand pain." That deep emotional resonance, that is the absolute beating heart of this text, and it's exactly what drew so many readers in. Section 1. A Mother's Best-Selling Memoir. The public's response to her intensely personal plea was immediate. It debuted right at number 4 on the New York Times bestsellers print hardcover nonfiction list. To put that into perspective, for a memoir about such raw, ongoing grief to instantly catapult to the top of the charts, that shows a profound connection with the public. She became a central figure, a very human face for a tragedy the whole world was watching, and readers everywhere responded by seeking out her words. The cover design itself is incredibly stark and simple. It's really just the title and the author's name, styled like it's written on a piece of masking tape against a textured background. The publisher, Random House, consciously chose not to use any dramatic imagery. Instead, this visual restraint acts as a quiet, unassuming vessel for an unimaginable tragedy. It really prepares you for the raw, unvarnished reality inside those pages. Section 2. The Timeline of the After. In the book, Rachel divides her life into 2 eras, the before and the after. The after begins on October 7th, 2023, and it's anchored by a stark, devastating number, 328. In the author's note, we learn that Rachel's eldest child, her only son Hersh, had just turned 23. He was at a music festival when terrorists descended, killing more than 1,200 people. Hersh had his left forearm blown off by a grenade and was taken into captivity. He spent an excruciating 328 days trapped 66 feet underground in cramped tunnels with zero electricity or plumbing. The text doesn't flinch when describing the grim reality of how it all ended. Hersh and 5 other young captives were executed. They were shot at close range, bearing the scars of torture, starvation, and a total severance from the outside world. On day 330, their bodies were returned to their families. Rachel notes that Hersh had 6 bullet wounds, and his hair was covered in gunpowder. That is the harrowing factual backdrop of this memoir. Section 3. Remembering Hersh. But Rachel doesn't just give us statistics or the horrors of the situation. She uses these deeply intimate, almost cinematic details to bring her son to life right on the page. She makes sure we meet the boy she loved, not just the hostage we saw on the news. She writes, "His gait looked perfect from behind. His ankles were neither pronated nor supinated, completely straight pointing forward. What really stands out here is the hyper-specific nature of a mother's memory. She remembers the exact mechanics of his walk. She knows how his shoes wore down perfectly evenly. These aren't just broad strokes, you know? They are these studied, exact details of a parent who has watched their child walk away thousands of times." She keeps building this vivid physical profile, adding, "His nostrils were shaped like small kidney beans. His nose had been delicate, then it was broken, and it became a nose." She anchors his physical features to really specific memories, like when he was 17 and broke that delicate nose in a pickup basketball game in Georgia. By sharing these little details, she grounds a massive geopolitical tragedy in the profound, highly specific love of a mother. She also memorializes him in this incredibly evocative, poetic way. She writes, "His eyes were cookies. I couldn't find the pupils within the dark chocolate brown irises." She describes his resting face as serenely placid, his hooded upper lid sloping downward. It's a sequence that ensures Hersh is remembered as a flesh and blood human being, complete with straight eyelashes and untamed eyebrows. He isn't merely a symbol of a broader conflict. Section 4. The Universality of Grief. Stepping back from that hyper-specific focus on Hersh, Rachel presents a much broader thematic thesis. She writes, "What binds us is pain. Pain is pain is pain is pain is all part of this enterprise of being human." She's explicitly saying that while the set design of our trauma might look different, loss is loss. The events that led to her specific nightmare were highly publicized and uniquely horrific, for sure. But she firmly believes the underlying human suffering is identical to the grief anyone feels when they lose a piece of themselves.
Section 5. The Marketing Controversy.
So how was this deeply visceral, personal text actually presented to the world? If we put on our analytical hats for a second, a major critique published in the Jewish Review of Books pointed out something really interesting. They noted that Random House's jacket flop description completely omitted 4 highly specific words: Israel, Gaza, Hamas, and Jew. The critique neutrally observes that the publisher crafted a summary that specifically avoided the geopolitical and ethnic realities of what actually happened. The contrast here is honestly jarring. Inside the book, the author's actual text is visceral and horrifying. She confronts the reader with scars of torture and close-range bullet wounds. But the publisher's marketing copy, it pivots entirely. It frames the book at its essence as a universal story of trying to live with grief, of how we suffer and how we love. Critics argue this was a deliberate choice by the publisher to sanitize the text, basically replacing the distinct, uncomfortable reality of the terror attack with universalized marketing boilerplate to appeal to a wider audience. Acclaimed author Dara Horn brings up a really critical perspective on this phenomenon. She argues that mainstream American media was able to share Rachel's grief specifically because it fit a narrative that audiences are already comfortable with, the narrative of powerlessness. Horn's analysis suggests that the publishing and media industries often require the complex, distinct context of a tragedy to be erased, or at least heavily softened, to make the story palatable and universal enough for mass consumption. All of this leaves us with a really provocative question to chew on. How do we balance the universal experience of grief with the specific, gritty realities of a tragedy? Rachel Goldberg-Polin wrote a deeply specific book about her son's horrific murder, yet she herself noted that suffering is all the same. At the same time, the publishing industry leaned heavily into that universality, arguably at the expense of the specific context that caused the suffering in the first place. It's this profound tension between personal reality and public marketing that ultimately defines the footprint of this memoir. Thank you for joining me for this explainer. Keep analyzing, keep asking questions, and we'll see you next time.